So let's talk about what a decision tree is. How about let's do taxonomy, because I think we understand that pretty well. Let's suppose I'm thinking of an animal, and we want to determine what animal it is. Does it do photosynthesis, or does it do the Krebs cycle? Do you know what those are? Photosynthesis consumes light and carbon dioxide and produces oxygen and energy. The Krebs cycle consumes oxygen and sugar, I think, and produces energy. Okay, basically, if you go this way, you are a plant. If you go this way, you are an animal. Right? Okay. Well, suppose we have an animal, then you might ask, does it have a backbone? Backbone? And if this is the yes side and this is the no side, then what does it mean if you go down the yes side? Well, then it means you're a vertebrate. And there are many kinds of vertebrates. Let's say, do you have mammaries? And we'll say this is the yes side, this is the no side. And if you do, then you're a mammal. And at some point we could ask, are you a large mammal or a small mammal? And I don't know, let's say you're a large mammal. And we get down to here, and at this point, what do you know about this creature? Do you know that it has a central nervous system? Do you know that it has fur? Do you know if it has a tailbone? Do you know if it has 4 legs and 2 eyes and a neck and claws? Not all of them, but at least it's got something like claws. I don't have claws, I have fingernails. But basically everything in this category has a lot of attributes in common, right? And at least everything down here has a central nervous system. How do I know that? Because everything in that group has a central nervous system. And pretty much nothing in the plant group has a central nervous system. This is called a decision tree. The idea of a decision tree is you build a big tree where you ask questions, and then the questions, based on what you know, lead to information. And then down here we could have some description of all of the attributes of large mammals that are vertebrates, that are animals, that have cells that do the Krebs cycle or something like that. And do you see how this helps you kind of understand the world a little bit? A decision tree is a useful tool for helping you categorize knowledge. Now let us ask, how are we going to build a decision tree? So let's suppose you have a bunch of data and you want to now build a decision tree. Where are you going to get that decision tree from? Let's play 20 questions. I'm thinking of a thing. Somebody asked me a question. Does it breathe? No, it does not breathe. So our tree so far looks like this. Breathe? Somebody be thinking of another question. No, yes, okay. Now what you've done is you had in your head a list of all the things in the world that I could be thinking of. You didn't really, you had some vague representation of things that it could be. And just by answering that question, we've kind of cut them in half at some level. And you've ruled out half of them. It's not one of those. It's something that's over here on this side, right? So we've just chopped down the list of possibilities, so now ask me another question. Is it real or fantasy? It's a real thing. So if in the top half of here you had dragons and unicorns now, you're no longer going to consider dragons and unicorns. But over here we have taxes and death and other real things. Now, you know it's somewhere in this group of real things that don't breathe, right? Okay, ask me another question. Is it artificial? Ooh, I'm going to say no, it's not artificial. So now we've divided the set of possibilities in half again, and we've branched again by asking, is it artificial? This is the yes side, this is the no side. So it's not artificial, you know it's real, you know it doesn't breathe. If we kept going for a long enough time, I'm not going to make you play this out to the end because I can see you're not feeling very creative today. Yes, I'm ripping on you. You agree with me, you would eventually have it narrowed down to pretty much you'd know what it is, right? Okay. It was a bruise. I bet you that one would have taken you a long time. Have you ever played with one of those electronic 20 questions devices? Yeah. Aren't those amazing? They get what you're thinking of most of the time. And I mean, if you get ridiculously specific, obviously they won't. But if you're somewhat general, they're surprisingly good at figuring out what you know. Let's talk about how they work. Do you see how we built a decision tree? We started with some data, which represented the set of everything you know, and we just started chopping it up. And by the time we were satisfied that we had reached the end, we create a leaf. And what do you do with the leaf? You finally provide what's called a label, and the label tells everything you know about this category, things that fall under that sub-branch of the tree. What we're going to be doing in this assignment is we'll be starting with some data. So let's look at the data. Which data do we want to look at? Let's look at the soy data set. This that you are looking at is an ARF file. ARF stands for Attribute Relation File Format. It's an ASCII text-based file format. You can read about it if you care. It's a standardized format for expressing tables of information. It's pretty useful for machine learning type applications. The ARF format starts with comments that begin with a percentage sign. Then it has some metadata, which begins with an @ sign, like the email @ followed by a bunch of data. It's a bunch of comma-separated values. Okay? And here's an example of some data in an ARF format. Essentially, the comments say whatever the author wanted to say. The metadata gives names to all of the columns. Think of a database. Database has a bunch of columns and a bunch of rows, right? And the data provides element values for all of the rows. Do you see that this is basically a database table? If we wanted to count them, let's see, from 93 to 128, it looks like there are 35 columns in this data. And let's see, from 130 down to 501, there are 171 rows in this data. And so it's just a big matrix, a big table. And the first column is clearly the date. The second column is the plant stand. The third column is the precipitation. Fourth column is the temperature. Fifth column is whether or not there was hail. Basically, this is a data set that describes something. And this particular one is called the Large Soybean Database. We're trying to describe soybean data. Here's a bunch of data. And I represented data with a rectangle in my example here. And we just asked a bunch of questions in order to build a tree. That's exactly what we're going to do in this assignment. So that was one of the data sets. Here's the vowel train features one. The vowel data set contains a bunch of what are called Mel frequency Kepstrel coefficients. Here's what that means. A bunch of graduate students took a microphone and they made vowel sounds. When they made vowel sounds, here's what the graduate students said into the microphone. Hid, hide, heed, had, hide, had, hod, hod, hood, hud, and head. Okay, it's funny. And as they recorded their themselves making vowel sounds into the microphone, they recorded the wave positions of the microphone, and they performed Fourier analysis on that, and then they do Fourier analysis on the Fourier analysis to produce what are called MFCCs. And these MFCCs are basically numbers that represent what the audio looked like that was recorded by the graduate students. And they've divided these samples into test and train, which I've divided a separate way, so you can ignore that column. Apparently they had names, Mike and Andrew and Joe and Nick and Penny and Wendy and Sarah and Rose. We have these numbers that represent what they said, and we're going to use those numbers to try to predict what vowel was being said. So we're basically doing audio recognition. See how that's a useful thing to do? This data set has something to do with hepatitis. And there's a bunch of questions you can ask of somebody that has hepatitis, such as, what's your age, what's your sex, are you taking steroids, are you on antivirals, are you fatigued, do you have malaise, are you anorexic, etc. Do you feel like you have spiders crawling over your skin? I think if you have hepatitis, that makes your skin itchy, and so That's a reasonable question to ask. And based on all of these questions, we're going to try to predict, are you going to live or are you going to die? So we're going to predict the mortality of somebody based on the symptoms they give to us. Do you see that's a useful thing to do? Wouldn't it be cool if you had a cell phone app where you could type in your symptoms and it would say, oh, you're going to die? Then you'd know, okay, I better set my affairs in order, or something like that. It's kind of an artificial doctor. Okay, all of these are prediction problems, and we're going to train a machine to read these features and understand what they mean. So if you as a human look at this, if I say to you, okay, a guy named Tim, who is male, spoke into the microphone, and his male frequency kestrel coefficients are minus 4.1, 3.6, minus 0.75, 0.066, 0.789. What did he say? That'd be a hard problem for you, right? And you'd say, he said hide. And I'd be like, oh, you got it. Maybe. I don't know if you did. Okay, let's see what he really said. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So if I go here to the 12th one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Nope, he said hood. I was wrong. Okay, so the guy said hood, and we knew that because those numbers. Can you see this is a hard problem? If a machine could pull this off, that would be kind of cool, right? Okay, here's how we're going to do it. We're going to take your data. Here's your data. And we'll basically play 20 questions. We'll say, all right, is column 3 greater than or less than, say, 0.298? And you see about half of these are going to be greater than that value in column 3, and about half of them are going to be less than that in column 3. And then we can divide your data into 2 parts. Now, it probably won't just divide cleanly like this, but pretend this part I just selected is all the part where that column is less than 0.283. I've just divided my data in half, right? And I could pick another column and another value and find the chunk of that data that fits it, and I could divide that in half. I could keep chopping it in half until I've built a tree, and that tree would basically do the same thing that we have described here with this 20 questions game. And that would make a decision tree that would allow us to predict what the person said into the microphone, or whether the hepatitis patient's going to live or die, or whether the soybeans are going to grow or be overcome with mold, or whatever it is we're trying to predict. One more demonstration. Let us suppose that the game now is we're going to try to predict red or blue, and there are some red points in the universe, and there are some blue points in the universe. And you want to build a decision tree that separates the red points from the blue points. Well, the way we would do this is we'll pick a point. Let's suppose it's right here, and we'll divide the data. I've now divided the data, and this represents the root node of my tree. So that line there, imagine a node in a tree that's at the root level, and it says, is x greater than or less than this value, which is the value where I've drawn that line. And then we could recursively break up this point, this data. So maybe the next level will chop this left branch right here by asking the question, is y greater than or equal to that value that I arbitrarily picked? And maybe on the right side, it'll arbitrarily pick a different value and cut right there, right? And then maybe over here, we'll cut right there. And down here, do you see that there's no need to cut anymore? Why? Yeah, the data is, the labels are homogeneous. And when the labels are homogeneous, there's really no need to keep recursing. So let's not recurse there. We're going to recurse down this branch. And then maybe there, and then maybe there. And then down this side, maybe we'll cut there, and maybe we'll cut there. And down this side, how about we cut there, and cut here, and cut there, and cut here, and cut there. And we recurse until everything is homogeneous. I think now every single box is homogeneous, don't you agree? Okay, so Okay? And now, suppose I came along and I gave you a new dot. And suppose the mystery dot falls right here. What color is it? Red. Okay, suppose the mystery dot falls right here. Blue, here red, here blue, here red. You get it, right? Because it's just the color of the box that it falls in. And how would you do that programmatically? Well, you'd have this decision tree, you'd start at the root level, and you'd have to remember that this one was the root, right? But you start at the root and you say, okay, which side am I on? And then you'd recursively follow down the tree, which side am I on, which side am I on, until you finally end up at a leaf node. And the leaf nodes represent these boxes. And once you reach a box, you can ask, what is the label? And the label will either be red or blue, and now you know the answer. Okay? Do you see that this is a perspective of a decision tree, which is not really any different from this perspective? It's just kind of a different way of looking at it.